This is Impactful Realities. This podcast is for those at the front line of innovation who thrive in chaos and engineer breakthroughs. We're talking high-pressure industries, high-stakes decisions. We go deep with leaders designing AI-driven virtual and augmented realities and building cutting-edge solutions for the world's most dangerous, demanding, and high-stakes environments. If you're ready to uncover what it really takes to create new realities that defy limits and reshape industries, then listen carefully, as if the future depends on it, because it does. Here is your host, Dr. Jason Jerald.
Today we have an amazing guest, Annie Eaton, who I met a couple weeks ago in Houston at the Industrial Immersive Conference. And she gave just a really spectacular talk about impact and what that means for business and ROI. And so I just immediately saw she would be a perfect fit for this podcast. Annie has been in the XR industry for a little bit over 10 years now. In fact, she's written in her book I have here, The Extended Reality Blueprint. Highly recommend. I'm about maybe a third of the way through it, still getting some great insight from it. But it really sort of is about my understanding. I guess, Annie, you may be able to tell our audience better than I do, but those that are looking to get into XR as far as offering value such as training or how the technology can be used. And so, again, I highly recommend that book. Some of the examples that she talks a little bit about in that book, but what we'll be talking about in a podcast is what are the real numbers, right? We can all sort of talk about how awesome this technology it is and how cool, but we're beyond that. The technology's matured more in that. And so she actually has numbers in place of, what are the response from their users and how is it affecting business? And so, for example, she's worked with Mars Wrigley and Delta, where she's helped them save over $20 million combined savings through XR training. Those are pretty impressive numbers, and that's only across two companies. And so just imagine what this could do for your company.
Well,
So Annie,
thank you.
Yeah, Annie, why don't we go ahead and start off and kind of tell us about your story and your journey of where you came from and your motivation to move into the VR side of training.
Yeah, I do not have a traditional software developer or game developer path when it comes to getting into VR. Like so many people I know, it really happened because someone gave me the VR bug. And I'm not talking about a computer bug. I'm talking about just the desire to explore this amazing technology. And that happened for me back in 2013, 2014, when a coworker at a former company we both worked at brought in the Oculus DK1 from the Kickstarter and was showing it around to people at the office. And all it really takes is that one evangelist. His name was Peter. And bringing that in, showing people in person, I think showing people the technology is so important to getting them excited about it. And that is exactly what happened for me. And so it kind of evolved from there in this interest initially, trying to get it sold into that company. I was in the marketing department at that time, and I thought, oh, what a great way to use this is for marketing. Unfortunately, it was a little ahead of its time for me and my role there. So it was a no, but it got me thinking about how else this technology could be used. And so that same friend and I started a meetup group in Atlanta, now called XR Atlanta, now has over 1,600 members. But that community and that enthusiasm that all of these individuals had for the tech really was my motivation for doing what I ended up doing. So we, out of that meetup, ended up starting a company because there were so many people asking how they could use the technology. And again, marketing background, I'm thinking that type of use case. So a lot of our early projects were product visualization and event marketing solutions and that type of work. And then as time went on, of course, those projects are really fun. We even got to work on one for the Super Bowl. You can't really get to a bigger event than that. But as we kept going, training kind of emerged as this use case that was provable. And I think that's what, a lot of our conversation is going to be about today is what are the best use cases for VR and what can the technology do to help organizations achieve that return on investment? And so even though, my heart is with marketing and these are really fun projects, I started thinking about the future of the technology and where my business was going to thrive. And training was the clear path. And so that's kind of when that shift happened around 2021, 2022. It was kind of an instant shift into, oh, this makes so much sense. We're already leveraging the work we've done and the skills we've built, but applying it in a way that is provable and really showing these incredible results to these organizations.
Yeah, and so in some way, my path was very different, but in some ways similar. And so, yeah, I remember back in the days, not DK1, but DK2, I literally like my eyes were watering because I was so close to crying, and I was trying to be a tough
Yeah.
guy and not cry, but it was tough. It was just compared to, the different headsets I used up to that point, this just was, it was so good. And so, yeah, I could tell that was going to be a big change, and also the meetup path. So,
Mhm.
I ended up taking on the meetup, the VR meetup, the RTP VR meetup, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina.
Okay.
And it was crazy. The first meetup was, maybe 5 people. And then I think it was pretty close after the DK1 launched, suddenly 300, 400 people are showing up at meetups. And all I did
Mhm.
was like post something. It's like the most
Yeah.
amazing, yeah, marketing you could do. But that's not what this podcast is about, because back then it was a cool thing and it still is a
Mhm.
cool thing. But people are starting to realize you need more than that cool factor.
Mhm.
What is the real business case? And that's what I really appreciated about your talk at the Industrial Immersive Conference is, okay, what is the real result and what is the real impact and what is that implication for business beyond just, all of us being blown away by this technology that maybe, fades after we've seen a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that you have to do when you're starting is to find a really good use case. I mean, that sounds like it should be so obvious, and it's not, that hard to do once you really start thinking about it. But something that people want to do, as you just mentioned, it's cool technology. It's still cool. It was cool back then. It's cool now. But we're trying to go beyond the cool, and we're trying to come up with something that's cool and effective. And so coming up with that use case and really thinking through what results you're trying to achieve and why it's important is such an integral step to do at the very beginning of any project. And one way that we do this, defining the use case, is to look at different costs or even losses within an organization and identify those, and then think about what this is going to be a double negative, but like what loss can be reduced or what can be gained by either helping people perform their jobs faster or more efficiently or with less machine downtime. And when we can come up with like where these gaps are, where this loss is, and then find a way to mitigate that through VR training, I think that's where we found the most effective use cases. So I would say, yeah, think about what you want to gain, but think about also what kind of loss you want to prevent.
Yeah, and I remember that's one thing I like too. I made it that far in your book so far as I continued reading through it. But yeah, not necessarily being attached to, the first use case you see. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, what we like to do, and I know other organizations like to do, is when you go in a company, sometimes they have a really good, fit for the technology and they sort of already figured it out. But oftentimes they, aren't familiar where the technology, where it might best fit. And so you are new to this, kind of keeping an open mind of where it might fit within your organization, where you can get the most results. And part of that too is not just where the biggest, where the money is, right? Which is certainly a factor, but is it a fit, right? Because VR, XR, it's good for some things and not for other things. And so you need
Yes.
both of those of, the impact, but then actually, is it feasible? And is it feasible with, today's technology versus 10 years from now?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think just thinking about things, especially when it's training related, that are either impossible to do in the physical world,
Right.
but without proper training, or things that are dangerous, or things that waste material, or things that cause a lot of wear and tear. Those are really good use cases as well. So,
Yeah.
thinking through why you want to use VR in the first place is big, because it's very different than e-learning. It's very different than PowerPoint, but some things you don't need to replicate in VR, and that's okay.
Yeah, and really the best, the ideal use cases is doing the impossible, right? The things
Mhm.
that you can't do with traditional training. That's where you get the real savings or, ROI. Now those are tougher to find. So those,
Yeah.
aren't going to happen all the time, but that can be the ideal. But there's certainly other, smaller sort of things versus the impossible that you can do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe you could talk further about actually talking with the experts, or maybe someone that's, if it's an assembly line sort of thing. It's not just talking to the decision makers, but, figuring out where the real barriers and, challenges they're having, those that really know their stuff, the subject matter experts.
Yes, I definitely think that speaking with the subject matter experts as early as possible, even before the project or even before the use case has been approved, is really important. And it's funny, I actually had a great call with a subject matter expert for a project we're thinking about yesterday. And she didn't really know too much about VR. I explained, of course, like what we were looking for. And I asked her what part of the machine process that we're trying to train for, like what is the most fun thing to do if you know what you're doing? Because we were trying to come up with a really good first use case, very small demo, and in a lot of cases, a way we'll kind of grab attention is thinking about something that's going to be really engaging and interactive in VR. Because it's like we're trying to catch people's attention, we're trying to give them something that's going to benefit them, but also do something that people are going to enjoy learning from. And so we worked together to come up with this. And she's like thinking about it. She's like, I've never really been asked to think about what part of my job is the most fun. But then she was able to define a really important part of the process, something that happens once an hour. So they have to do it very frequently, and something that they're trying to get their time down to where very experienced operators can do this process in a matter of 1 to 2 minutes. But newer employees might take longer. And so by just thinking about what was the most interactive piece of her work and reframing it as like, because you're an expert at this now, what is fun to you? She was able to help me come up with the best use case for VR so that we could potentially bring this project to fruition. So I mean, some of the subject matter expert conversations are fun, but then we have to like draw it out of them because they don't necessarily have exposure to VR and all of its capabilities and also its limitations. So I think educating the subject matter experts is also a really important part of that process. And then once the project starts, the most fun, if we're going to continue on with the fun thing for my team to do, is a lot of our clients let us go to site and do the work ourselves. So we get trained, we learn, we get to do things on the job. I know we're going to be talking about Delta de-icing a little later, but they actually let one of our designers go up in a de-ice bucket and actually de-ice a plane with water in the summer. And it gave him, of course, the most realistic experience because he's doing it for real. But then that helps us be able to not only design the best way to do it in VR, the most realistic way to do it in VR, at least to the limits of VR, and then also testing. So when we're going through the testing process and making sure that this is going to be effective, because he had had that hands-on experience with the subject matter experts, that only helped us be able to verify our own work. So there are all sorts of ways that we work with the subject matter experts, but I think it's integral to include them in the entire process from use case definition all the way through testing and deployment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sort of what we noticed is talking with the SMEs, the actual users, is they wouldn't come up with any of these ideas themselves, and we wouldn't come up with the ideas ourselves. So,
Yeah.
an example I'm thinking of is air monitoring. So, are there toxic gases in the environment that you need to measure for? And the
Mhm.
challenge is the trainer doesn't know, you know, other than watching them, they don't have a history of where they held that air monitor. And so it's
Mm.
very simple. We just have the traces of where they were, and then you can
Yeah.
visualize that, in different creative ways. But we probably would have never came up with that idea ourselves unless we, were talking with them. And they didn't know what was possible because they didn't understand VR. And so, what seemingly this kind of really simple, implementation, actually, people wouldn't think about it until, in hindsight. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so important to work with them, not for them, but actually, ideally be there with them in the trenches.
Right. Yeah, that example you just brought up is a perfect way to bring the impossible into VR. Because
Yeah.
you said they're not able to measure that. They don't have a wearable, and so you're giving them something that they never could have before, which is so cool.
Yeah.
So
One of the challenges is we could not actually do that because to go into a toxic environment, there's no way they'd let us in. But
yeah.
interestingly, how they do their training, they just basically have a dead air monitor and then the trainer reads out and, made up numbers of what they might be seeing. And so, we went through all that training. And one of our instructors, he said to one of our engineers, he's like, you know more than my students do. This is crazy, right? Because he got to know the problem so well and thinking about it more than just, following the directions.
Oh,
But that
that's
was only
awesome.
because he had talked to, we've been talking to a lot of those subject matter experts and really understanding the problem and not being
Yes.
confined by so much the way things are done now, because you're able to think
Hmm.
outside that box when you come from an outside perspective.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, I think maybe going into specifically with Mars Wrigley, what you did with them, and also the de-icing, talking about with Delta, but starting with Mars Wrigley, what sort of the overview of what you did with them, and then moving on to the biggest wins.
Yeah. Well, so that project, it ended up becoming a series of simulations. So, um, something I do like to share, especially for those who are trying to get buy-in from their organizations, is we did do a proof of concept with them first. So, it actually didn't have to do with the machinery. We ended up coming up with the primary use case, but it was a process that's very common, of course, lockout, tagout in many different industries. So something that's very familiar and straightforward to understand. And doing that on a piece of machinery, kind of simplified for a proof of concept, but showing what could go wrong if the person did not perform that task properly. So when we were first working with them, they really wanted to catch the attention of leadership and say, this is effective. If you do this in VR, your brain is going to get some sort of I don't know, inspiration to do your job properly, because this is like the worst thing that could happen to you if you don't do this job correctly. And it is, I mean, it's not the worst thing, but crushed hands and hand injuries are very common in manufacturing, and so that was something that we wanted to visually represent. And so in this demo proof of concept, we did show that. We had a lockout tagout process, a simplified version of it. You had to follow the instructions. If you didn't follow the instructions, your hand got crushed. And because your hands are tracked in VR or with controllers, it's something that's very easy to like attach to the physical position of your hand in the real world. And you're seeing it and you're rotating
Yeah.
around. And you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And that aha kind of in your face moment really caught the attention of people within the organization to believe in VR and believe that this could be effective.
I'm
And then that's
curious,
where yeah, go ahead.
are you familiar with the rubber hand illusion?
So, I don't know it by that name. Is it maybe explain it to me, or is it like
Yeah.
the
So
ghost
in the
the
old days,
phantom
you'd
limb
have
thing?
Yeah, essentially,
Yeah,
yeah, it's the same area of research. So
okay.
essentially, you'd have your real hand, your right hand, then you'd have a mirror being your left hand, but
Yes.
it would just look like your right hand, right? But
Mhm.
and then you'd have that rubber hand, and they would pound the rubber hand with a hammer or whatever, and people would like that visceral
Lose their
knee
mind.
jerk response, like it would not be good. I mean, it gets sort of, bordering on ethics if you should be doing that or not, but they'd freak
Yeah.
out as if it actually happened. And so it's this very visceral response. That's basically exactly what you're doing
Yeah,
here.
it
People
is.
like, it's not just this like theoretical, logical thing of, oh, I crushed my hand. Like you feel it. I
Mhm.
don't mean
Yeah,
you
and
don't
of
feel it
course we were
physically, but you feel it emotionally.
right. But even using just very light haptics in the controller and just having
Mm,
that vibration occur right when the hand
even
crushed,
better.
like that really jolted people. So, we put what we call like safety incidents in as many projects as people will let us. We even have a new safety simulation coming out this June. That's more of a licensed product, and every single one of the lessons have a safety incident that you see. Not all of them are happening directly to you. They're happening kind of in front of you, animated in VR to your coworker. But we have found so much success with multiple customers in showing what can go wrong that I am a big believer in it. And of course, doing it tastefully and ethically and not making a joke or a game out of it, because these
Yeah.
are like real problems. They are real safety issues, highly dangerous environments sometimes. And so it's like people see these demos and they think they're funny, and I'm like, yeah, it catches your attention and it might seem funny to you, but like this could actually happen and it does. And when people think about that, they're like, okay, now it's time to take it seriously. So yeah, I am a big supporter of putting that stuff into VR to an extent, of course, not traumatizing people, but really helping them understand the importance of safe work. So that was a really, really great first project with Mars Wrigley. And then again, that kind of got enthusiasm and buy-in to come up with the next. And the way that they had identified what machinery we were going to do VR training on was really identifying where there were opportunities for growth within production, also reducing wear and tear, reducing damage on the machine. And then the fact that this one site that we worked with to start had a lot of these machines, a lot of replicas, and they were doing a lot of hiring. And so it was just a really great candidate all around. And for this, I like to say there are multiple ways that you can scale VR within an organization. So a lot of people think of scaling just as more people using it, more disbursement throughout the organization and all the different sites. But this was very different, and where I would consider that scaling wide across an organization. I have kind of called this scaling deep within one very, very specific, I guess, content or machine. And so we had produced 4 different projects for this one piece of machinery, but each of them served a different purpose, whether it was general familiarization, troubleshooting the machine when there was an issue, performing this inspection that occurs quite frequently. So performing that process and then learning about different pinch points and hazards. And so I think coming up with this very comprehensive, intensive content library for this one piece of machinery, they were able to find astronomical results by implementing VR. So it started very small and then it grew, and as it was more effective, they just invested more into it, and that's where we
Yeah.
came out with this great case study.
Yeah, I can imagine the costs there are probably just incremental because you all have a lot
Mhm.
of the assets and such already. So it's just kind of creating new
Yes.
training modules.
Yeah, that's a great point. We did already have, from the first machine familiarization simulation, we already had modeled the equipment and we already animated it and separated a lot of the parts to be interactive. And so, yeah, each one of them, we did not have to start over. We just added on more and more detail as we went.
And I know you mentioned you've been working with them from you work with your subject matter experts or those on the line from the beginning, but then also you're getting feedback from them throughout. So what was sort of some of that early feedback or doing polling or what was the reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction was really, really positive, so that's always a good sign. I think it's something that we did, which I would encourage others to try if you need it, is we brought the 3D models and everything into an AR app and lined it up with the real machinery and just made sure everything was matching up. And we met with the matter experts during that process as well, and they were giving us like kind of these little tweaks because difference about this project than some of our others is that we did not have any 3D models to start. So the machinery is older. It's had a lot of different additions and changes that were highly custom to this company, and so it's not like this is just something that's that the 3D models were actively available for. So that I think the subject matter experts just helping us tweak the realism of the machine throughout as we went was important. And then the trainers actually did some polling after the training classes, and almost everything was very close to the top 5. I think it was like right between 1 and 5, and almost everything was an average of, I think, 4.6 and above. And these were questions like, do you think this training helped you learn? Was it an engaging experience? Was it comfortable? So I'm really glad that they did that because, of course, leadership's going to think, maybe this is a great thing to do. The trainers might think it's a great thing to do, but it's not going to be good unless the trainees like it too, or at least
Yeah.
they think they learned something from it. And
Yeah,
so I
everyone
think
needs to appreciate it.
here, yeah, everyone needs to appreciate it, especially the trainees, and because they're the ones that it's ultimately impacting. And so I think hearing that feedback from them was one of the best parts of it.
Yeah, we had crazy net promoter scores, which basically ask how much would you recommend this to
Mm-hmm.
someone, which was pretty much perfect, which was crazy. I mean, we've done, other real life workshops, right? Where, pretty good results, but I've never seen results like this. Is crazy. And so part of that is the power of the VR. Now, of course, you can't just assume just because it's VR that it's going to get that. It's got to be well done and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the only factor, but yeah, for engagement is just, if done well, is just spectacular. But
Yeah.
beyond that, what were some of the higher level metrics you looked at?
Yeah. Yeah, the good stuff. So this particular machinery previously took about 12 weeks to train their employees on, and that was reduced by half down to 6 weeks. So I think that's like, huge. 3 months down to a month and a half is a big deal. And this is some pretty complex, big machinery. And so that is one. Now, we also heard that they had an 18% increase in employee efficiency for new hires right out of the gate. So, not only are you cutting that training time in half, but you're also putting your employees out at a higher output level themselves. So they're operating more efficiently than the previous trainees and more of a traditional classroom learning style. So that was really positive. And then something that we heard but were not expecting was actual employee retention increased by 10%. That's not something we were trying to measure, I don't think, at the beginning, because, usually you think, oh, you're teaching someone a process. It's like, are they faster? Are they more efficient? Are they learning it? But I believe that it was probably partially because they feel more confident in their job. So they're staying because they know what they're doing. And then partially maybe because of that reduction in training time being so significant that they're out on the job faster, they're engaged with their company faster, and they're staying. Because I would feel like staying in training for a few months, you might get kind of itchy after a while. And so
Yeah.
I think there were a multitude of factors that went into that 10% increase, but I'm very happy that VR had such a big impact on it.
Yeah, turnover and training a new employees, especially when it's extensive. I mean,
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest costs companies have. So yeah, enormous potential for savings there. But not just
Yeah.
potential. You guys actually calculated
Yeah.
some of those savings, right?
Exactly. Yes, yes. And yeah, they did a lot of calculations, and as we've expanded through the organization, it's been really cool to see that that is something they are thinking about at the beginning before they even approve a project. They're
Yeah.
very dedicated to being able to confirm that they will prove that ROI. And so it's different because that's not always been the case. And so I think for companies who are looking into doing any sort of VR training, identifying those metrics before you start is going to be very important if you want to measure them at the end. And for companies who aren't, because we've run into this case where they're like, well, we're not really tracking that. So how can we measure it? If you're doing a custom simulation production, there is going to be a timeline to actually produce the work. So start right then. If you have identified that you're not measuring something, it's a lot easier in manufacturing because they always are measuring everything. But at any organization, if you have goals and you don't know how you're going to measure, because maybe you're not measuring already, it's not too late to start right then,
Yeah.
because you can get a lot of data in the production timeline that you'll then be able to measure against once it's deployed.
That's a great point about manufacturing measuring everything because
Yeah,
unfortunately in other fields we don't do that and we
it's
definitely need
different.
to. So yeah,
Mhm.
much easier to work with. They're kind of expecting that. I'm curious, was Mars like forecasting or estimating? Obviously, you don't know what the true numbers will be, but when they put together the project, did they have an idea of what type of savings or return they might be getting?
For the first one, I don't think so. We were lucky that the site that we worked with is known as an innovation site. They I believe, have maybe a little bit of budgetary discretion to invest in new innovative things in hopes that they will find something that's going to be effective long term. So I think because they are experimenting or exploring new technology more, um, the initial ROI calculation, I mean, it well exceeded what they were hoping for, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but I don't know that that was really a part of it. But I have noticed that every single project since they have been very, very calculated about making sure they're going to have a similar ROI or at least a very strong ROI.
And adding all those, because there's savings across multiple, multiple factors there. Did you guys get like a final number, what that savings was?
Yeah, I believe what they have shared is about $19 million in about 7 months of deployment. So,
Yeah, over 7 months.
mhm,
Wow. So yeah,
yeah.
those savings are probably going to extend in
Yeah,
the
and that
further
was a
years.
while
That's
ago, so
insane.
I'm sure it's more. I know that there was an initial kinda jump because that was the point, was this big round of hiring to meet demand.
Mm,
Something that they've told us was that just chewing gum, demand is off the charts.
yeah.
So, as much as gum as they can make, they can sell, which I'm not surprised because I love chewing sugar-free gum, and that was their specialty at the site we worked with. And so, yeah, I think the fact that they had a product that people really wanted and they knew if they ramped up production, they could sell it, it was just kind of this perfect storm.
Yeah. Yeah. And engagement leads, sort of the soft number, but it actually leads to those real numbers. Uh,
Mhm.
an example we had was working with hazmat operators, and they go through basic training, and then they can choose to go on to more advanced training to the hazmat
Mm.
technician level. But it's this very technical thing that firefighters aren't typically into the math and such that's required, and so it's maybe 2% of those go on to the technician level. And so what we saw in our pilots, that had shot to 20%, from 2% to 20% of that interest of saying, I actually want to, pursue this further as a career and be specialized in this area. And that's one of their biggest challenges is recruiting. They're just not able to find the
Mhm.
people that want to do it. And yeah, if you can get them engaged, you can have that major effect on people and their
Yeah.
passions.
Definitely. I've thought about, and we've kind of proposed this. We haven't really had many people take us up on it, but kind of taking these training simulations that we're producing and maybe modifying or simplifying them to be like career exposure for these organizations to
Yeah.
take to career fairs. I think I've heard of a couple of customers taking our Sims to career fairs, but they haven't modified them. So they're just like the full on training. And they're like, okay, well, maybe this is a good thing because you're really getting an idea of what you're doing on the job.
Mm,
But I think that's a cool way to like repurpose. I know we were talking earlier about repurposing the machines or the 3D models, but that could be another alternative way to repurpose the content
yeah.
for
Yeah.
recruiting, making kind of like a simplified version of it.
Yeah, kind of a very different target audience, but maybe it's similar to how you already had the assets, so it's just changing
Hmm.
up the modules a little bit. It might take a minimal amount of work to really make the case for that specific target audience.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we move on to Delta? So your project with them on de-icing airplanes. Could you give an overview of that?
Yes, that one came to us a few years ago, and the primary reason being that they do their de-ice training in July, and there's no icy planes in July, at least not here in the U.S. Maybe in other parts of the world, but they get this training, this comprehensive training, and similar to what they let us do, spray down a plane with water sometimes to practice, and then there's a gap of several months before they actually have to de-ice a plane, and so there's a couple reasons why de-icing in VR was thought of as a good idea. One, allowing them to practice again after a gap. And then the second is to give them these proficiency checks or assessments to verify that they do know the proper procedures. They know what to spray, what not to spray. Actually, what not to spray is pretty important, sometimes more important because it can lead to damages. But understanding that and being able to assess them right before they actually have to de-ice planes instead of July months ahead of time. So when we first started this project, we just did one plane. We did couple of different contaminants, different like weather. I think we had snow and clear skies and daytime and nighttime. So a few variables just with one plane. But then as that first year was successful, the company invested into expansion of different types of planes, more contaminant types, more environments. So, and other variables. And so it's really grown into a multi-year program. And we're about to start our fourth year of updates. So it's really cool to see how it's evolved over the years. And they again use it to assess their de-icers to make sure they're ready for the job.
That's amazing. 4 years. So one of the challenges, to be honest, I see in this industry is it gets to the pilot stage and people think it's cool, but then it never lasts beyond a year. So that's amazing. 4 years. I mean, obviously they're getting value out of it. And I know you had also mentioned, we talked earlier about the 50x improvement, right? Going from that 3 employees a day being able to train to 150 a day is just insane. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, so that has to do specifically with the amount of people that they could put through de-icing a plane. And so before VR, of course, you have to have a physical plane of which they are, usually in the sky or being used with passengers. And so they wouldn't really be able to pull planes out of commission to be able to run every single person through this proficiency check. And so they would, of course, assess them in different ways. And the more experienced employees already, were familiar with the process. But by bringing VR into it, instead of only being able to do 3 people per day, they're now able to do 150 people per day. And they have their employees, the people who are training and assessing the de-icers, they have VR kits. They've got tablet and 2 headsets that they go around with in a Pelican case to the different sites. And they'll just pump through people doing the assessments. Again, like I mentioned, there are parts of the plane you're not supposed to spray, and the whole simulation is set up to where if any of those parts are sprayed, it sends flags in the system. They don't pass or they get a grade that they need to redo it. And so we're really making sure that, of course, you can visually see those things when they're doing that on the physical plane, but when the programming is there and they can't, I'm not going to say cheat the system because they're not trying to cheat, but like it is very clear, yes or no, that you know how to do this and you know what to avoid and what not to avoid. So I think, they've found massive success. And yeah, that 50x assessment rate is huge. I know they have also mentioned there's not an exact number, but millions of dollars in operational costs saved. So that has to do with travel, not taking the planes out, and also the de-ice fluid, which is not only a monetary expense, but also, you don't want to have that material waste that you don't need. So a lot of different factors that have gone into this. I've just heard multi-million dollar ROI. But yeah, again, over years, it's been cool to see them continue to use this solution and find success in it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the fluid cost. My understanding is that is extremely expensive. And so you might or might not damage the plane, which is bad. That's going to, cost
That
something.
would cost a
But
lot. Yeah,
but you're like guaranteed to be using that, have that cost of the de-icing fluid. And so
hmm
yeah, it's like
definitely.
guaranteed savings there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. That's like why we say in the summer we can de-ice a plane with water. But in the winter, if you do that, the water will freeze, and that's totally not the point of all of this. So
Yeah.
you can't even practice with water in the winter.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. Yeah, any other metrics or findings or sort of insight you got from that project?
Yeah, that I think those are the main ones from that project. I know that we have made regulatory changes as well. So every year there are FAA regulatory changes to many different aviation processes and procedures. And so anytime that happens for the de-ice process, that's something that we update as well. I know that yeah, I think those are the main ones that we have to share there. We have another project we didn't speak about, also in manufacturing, but safety related. And if we're just talking numbers, I know that they recognized a 30% increase in knowledge retention. And again, this is all safety related subject matter specific to manufacturing. So it's just great to hear these companies actually measuring the success of these projects. Because I mean, you and I have been at this a long time, and it was not always the case.
For
Not only
sure.
that people weren't measuring, but they weren't sharing it. And so it's an exciting time because I think we are all moving past this like just do a pilot and then it's over. And of course, you still have those clients and those
Yeah.
companies, but so many are seeing that value fairly quickly. and then just investing more and expanding. So I would say like most of our customers now are repeat customers. Of course, still getting new ones, but the fact that they keep coming back over and over for more simulations, more content is a huge positive sign.
Yeah, certainly building up that trust and getting them to
Mhm.
return is, yeah, what's important. And yeah, I mean, pretty much all Fortune 500 companies are exploring and piloting these technologies, but they're not willing to share. And, they want to keep that competitive advantage. So that's great you're sharing. And then on the regulatory side, this is certainly, further off, but on the training side, eventually this is going to become, standardized that you need to do some form of VR training because it's just
Mhm.
in some cases you just aren't able to train for it, right? And so it's the right way to do things. We had when we were doing again the hazmat work, we had one of our hazmat trainers after he really understood it. He said, you this needs to be in every firefighter department across the nation. Like this has got to be a standard. And so it will get there, but yeah, standards and those sorts of things don't happen overnight. But I can see this 5-10 years out for sure. These are going to be standard trainings.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
We talked a little bit about, can you forecast or project what the savings are going to be, but you never actually know those numbers. And then there's other things, outside the numbers, just, you're talking to a SME and you get a complete surprise. What were some examples of, expectations, how you and Wrigley and Delta saw things going versus how it actually ended up?
Yeah, I think that in every project, we always try to prepare that things are not always going to turn out how we expect in the beginning. Of course, we want to know what we're going to make and most things we make. But there are some times where you either have aspirations that are unachievable or you have an idea mid project that you're like, oh my gosh, where did this come from, and like this is going to work, this will make this experience better, or this will help us teach this process better, and then we implement that. So something that I think for anyone who's getting into this as either a developer or a enterprise that's trying to explore this technology is like know that things are not always going to um, go the way you expect. I'm trying to think of a direct example of that off the top of my head, and I think, interactions are a big thing. So, a lot of times, we'll think we know how something is going to go. So, actually, the Delta DI's project's a good example of this. So we have, like, an open bucket and an enclosed bucket because those are 2 different types of vehicles that a de-icer would travel in as they're going around the plane, with their fluid, and we started with the open bucket. It's a lot more straightforward. It's on a semi-standardized path. But when we added the enclosed bucket, we wanted the ability for the person in the bucket to actually like control that and go closer or further away or up and down. And something that we didn't expect, and this is just something because VR is VR, is that some you're sitting down in real life in this enclosed bucket, but some people wanted to stand and some people wanted to sit, just because of like how comfortable they were in VR. And so something that we had to end up adding in was the ability to grab the whole console and like shift it based on your height and your, I don't know if you were sitting or standing. And there are different ways that people approach this. But something that I saw, and I can't remember which game, I think it was Cookout. So a lot of times we'll find inspiration from games. But something I think it's Cookout that does it is like when you have your table in front of you, you can have this little lever and you can adjust the height of your table so that it's perfect for you. Because when we're designing in VR, everything is in 3D space. And so we can assume the natural height of a table, or we can assume the natural height of this console. But depending on the person, that could change. So even if we have it set 4 feet off the ground, it might, be better at a different height for someone else. Or it might just not feel quite right. Or maybe they sit on an ergonomic pillow. Like, I don't know. And so being able to implement this like minor change to be able to adjust the height of the enclosed bucket console for an improvement in the user experience mid project is something that one, we did not expect, but after getting real feedback from our end users testing it, was a need. And so I think you'll just find these things. A lot of times they are feedback from the end user, that end up pushing you and challenging you, and then making a better experience overall.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a huge part of design is that iteration and continuous feedback. So that makes, yeah, it makes sense, but not something you would have thought about in advance. I'm curious, in the real world, do they have the choice to stand or sit, or is it always sort of the same way you get, whether you like it or not?
No, they have to sit. That's why it's
Okay.
I think that's why it's a
Interesting.
unique challenge because, like, their chair in their office did not feel like the chair in the enclosed bucket. I think that was throwing them off a
Mm,
little bit. And also the chair in the office is not the same height as the chair in the enclosed bucket. So I think just
yeah.
having that fine tuning. I am someone who actually prefers to stand in VR. Um, I know there are a lot of people who prefer to sit and people who prefer to smooth locomote. I cannot do it. And so I think coming up with, I guess, comfort settings and allowing people to experience VR in a way that is comfortable to them is important when we can. But I agree, like, because you're I like your question about, like, are they allowed to stand in the real world? No, they're not. So that was a little
Yeah.
bitty baby exception. But for some of our work, we do ask that. We're like, "Oh, can they sit while they're performing this
Yeah.
job?" They say, "No, like, we would not make a seated option because they do have to train for what they're going to be doing in the real world." So
That's,
it just kinda depends.
yeah, that's super interesting. Some prefer to stand because I would think you just feel safer sitting, but it's a good example. You
One
don't
would
know until
think.
you talk to people.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, different preferences in VR versus real world. That's different. Although in the real world, I like the standing desk. I sitting right now, but I normally like to stand, and I've done that so much that I actually like it better now. It's not because
Yeah,
I have to force it.
that's awesome. I know.
So
I go up and down all day long.
so I guess maybe there's not that much difference of VR versus real world.
Maybe not.
Okay, so as far as people or organizations, I should looking to invest in VR training, not only because it's damn cool, but as far as business wise, is this a good choice for them, or what use cases they might choose? Do you have any sort of most important advice that you would tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we spoke about earlier, finding where you can make that ROI provable is going to be important. Finding the either loss or the costs or whatever it may be that is going to be impacted the most significantly. Now, I know we've been talking about financial ROI. This can be calculated financially as well, but one thing that also has a big ROI impact is also safety training. And so, yes, it has a financial impact as well, but also just human impact is important. And keeping your employees safe and keeping them healthy and happy and working and not injured,
Yeah,
highly important. And so, yeah, there are going to be the monetary considerations, but there are other ways to calculate ROI. So maybe it's your safety record. Maybe that's not a
yeah,
direct financial impact, but it is a safety record that will improve the livelihood of your employees. So there are many different ways to calculate it. I think there's probably an infinite amount of ways to calculate it. I think when you're investing this as well, as mentioned a moment ago, like, know that things are not always going to turn out exactly as you expect and be okay with that. This is still new to a lot of people. Those of us who are making it, yes, we've been specializing in it for a while, but we're still figuring things out. I don't think it'd be as fun if we already had everything figured out. And so
absolutely.
the fact that we get to experiment and sometimes we're creating an interaction for the first time ever in the existence of VR, like, that is a really incredible thing. And so for organizations who are investing in this, whoever they dedicate as their XR champion or the person who's going to be like the main person spearheading that at the organization, give them a little bit of flexibility. Like, maybe it can all be within some sort of scope, but like, know that they may have to shift and tweak depending on how things turn out and how things feel. That's another thing that we talk about a lot when producing VR is how things feel, and that is not always quantitative. That is more
Yeah,
qualitative and harder to define sometimes. And so I think just educating people who want to get into this, that there are these intangible pieces to it, and that's okay, and that's expected, is important. But I mean, overall, if you find the right use case and you produce it well, it's a no-brainer that you'll get a great ROI. I think it's just understanding the process and what to expect.
Yeah, I love that word intangible. So, in fact, working with we work with the ROI Institute to, analyze these numbers. But they're called the ROI Institute, but they get it's not only about ROI, right? Impact is not always measured by ROI. It's a nice, objective way of measuring things, but it's not the only thing. So they use that same word you just used, as they say,
Mm.
tangibles being, can it be converted to real money? But then also intangibles, right? What are those sort of non-monetary impact? And they're both extremely important, right? If you're trying to change the culture to, fit the vision of the company, right? That's certainly important as well, even if it's, really difficult to put actual numbers to it.
Yeah. Amazing. Intangible, intangible. I'll have to start using that more.
Yeah, I've learned so much from them. They're an amazing partner. But yeah, I've also learned a lot from you through your book and, getting out there in the world, talking to people, having these interesting conversations. That's where the most learning, I think, comes from is, us, multiplying each other what we can be up to and, yeah, what the future holds for us. So I'm
Yeah.
excited as we continue to work towards that ultimate impact of what it means, not just for organizations and companies in the world, but society in general. I really do believe that the world is becoming a better place. And so I very much thank you for your time, Annie, and your insight and your numbers. I love numbers. I'm a numbers guy. And
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was just gonna say really quickly, like, thank you for hosting this podcast. I feel like it's just this conversation and from what I've seen you're trying to achieve with it, it is much needed, and it's great to learn from each other and continue to lean on this community because um, a lot of people are wanting and willing to talk about it. Maybe not all of them want to
yeah,
share the numbers, but I think you're right. We can learn from each other. Everything is still so new in the grand scheme of things that there's plenty of room to explore together. So thank you very much for hosting this.
absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Annie. And thank you to our listeners.
The Impactful Realities podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If it made you think, we'd love to hear your insights in the comments or contact us directly to shape the future together. Don't just subscribe, pass the torch, put it forward, send it to the next one in your circle who manifests things that matter, the builder who dreams big and innovates towards more impactful realities.